Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. Today's story is called Give Your Struggles to God, according to the Bible. Let me start with a question. Have you ever felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on your chest? Like no matter how hard you tried, things kept falling apart? Maybe it was the loss of a job, a broken relationship, or those silent moments when you felt like even your prayers weren't being heard. We've all been there, stuck in that quiet storm between faith and fear. This is the story of Daniel, a man who had reached his breaking point. By all appearances, he was doing fine, showing up to work, smiling when people spoke to him. But inside, he was drowning. Every night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers that seemed to go unanswered. God, he would say, why me? Why does it feel like you've gone silent? But sometimes, silence is not absence. It's preparation. Daniel's story begins on a rainy evening. He had just left the office, his mind full of worries, bills, unfinished work, and the emptiness he couldn't explain. The world outside was gray, but the storm inside him was darker. He stopped at a small park bench, dropped his bag, and looked up at the sky. The rain mixed with tears on his face. For the first time in years, he said the words he had been avoiding. God, I can't do this anymore. And that's when something changed, not in the sky, not in the rain, but inside him. A strange peace began to grow, small but real. He didn't know it yet, but that night would become the turning point in his life, the moment when he truly began to give his struggles to God. You see, the Bible says in 1 Peter 5 verse 7, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." It doesn't say some of your worries, it says all. But letting go isn't easy when you've spent years trying to control everything yourself. As Daniel began this journey of surrender, he would discover that trusting God didn't mean his problems disappeared. It meant he no longer faced them alone. But just when he thought things were getting better, a single phone call would shatter his fragile peace and test his faith in a way he never imagined. What happens next? Stay with me, because Daniel's story is about to show us what it truly means to give your struggles to God. The phone call came just as Daniel was about to fall asleep. His eyes were heavy, his thoughts quiet for the first time in days. But the moment his phone lit up, everything inside him tightened again. It was his sister, Ruth. She never called that late unless something was wrong. Her voice trembled as she said, "Daniel, it's Mom. She's in the hospital." The words hit him like a wave, pulling away the little peace he had found that evening. He sat up, heart pounding, the room suddenly too small to breathe in. Driving through the night, the streets blurred past him like shadows. Rain still fell, tapping against the windshield in a steady rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. He prayed quietly, whispering words he didn't even fully understand. "God, please not now. I just found a bit of strength. Don't take it away." But as the hospital lights appeared in the distance, he remembered something his mother always used to say when he was a child. "Faith isn't about everything going right, Daniel. It's about trusting even when everything feels wrong." Inside the hospital, time seemed to stand still. Machines beeped softly, nurses moved in silence, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. Ruth was sitting in the corner, her eyes red from crying. When Daniel saw her, he didn't say a word. He just sat beside her, staring at the closed door that led to their mother's room. He wanted to burst in, to ask questions, to demand answers, but instead, he waited. Something inside him whispered, "Be still." Hours passed. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change. He had spent so many years trying to control every detail, holding on to plans, goals, and fears. Now, sitting there in that cold hallway, he realized how small he was compared to the weight of the world. Yet, deep down, there was also a quiet pull, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to carry all of it alone. He pulled out his mother's old Bible from his bag. The cover was worn, the pages marked with notes in her handwriting. He opened it at random, and his eyes landed on a verse from Psalm 55 verse 22. Asterisk, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you." Asterisk, he read it again, slower this time, as if the words were speaking directly to his heart. But before he could even whisper a prayer, the doctor walked out, his expression unreadable. Ruth stood up quickly, fear flashing across her face. Daniel felt his breath catch. The hallway grew quiet, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. And in that silence, That moment between hope and heartbreak. Daniel would soon learn what it truly meant to trust God in the middle of the storm. The doctor's words came out slowly, almost carefully, as if each one carried a weight he didn't want to drop. "She's stable for now," he said, "but her heart is weak. We'll need to keep her under observation." Relief washed over Daniel for a moment, but it didn't last. The words "for now" echoed in his mind, reminding him how fragile everything still was. He nodded, pretending to understand, but inside, fear and faith wrestled for control. That night, as he sat by his mother's bedside, he watched her sleep. Her hand looked so small in his, the same hand that once held his when he was scared as a child. He wanted to be strong for her, to believe that everything would be okay, but the more he tried, the heavier his heart felt. He looked at the cross hanging on the wall above her bed and whispered, "God, I don't know what to do anymore." In the quiet of that hospital room, Daniel's thoughts wandered back to his own life. The struggles he had buried under work and busyness. His job had been wearing him down for months, and the pressure of bills and responsibilities had pushed him to the edge. He had drifted away from his faith, convinced he had to fix everything on his own. Now, faced with his mother's illness, all that control seemed to crumble. Meanwhile, Ruth sat near the window, silent but lost in her own storm. She had always been the stronger one, confident, prayerful, full of hope. But even she seemed shaken. Daniel could see the fear in her eyes, though she tried to hide it behind calm words. They were both fighting the same battle, the struggle to trust when everything felt uncertain. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and unending, as if the sky itself was mourning with them. And deep inside, Daniel felt the stirring of something he couldn't quite name, a pull toward surrender, and yet, a fear of what that surrender might cost. The next morning came too soon. The hospital room was dim, the air thick with worry. Daniel hadn't slept at all. His mother's breathing was slow and uneven, and each rise and fall of her chest felt like a countdown he couldn't stop. He kept praying under his breath, trying to hold on to faith, but his thoughts kept breaking through the silence. What if she doesn't make it? What if God doesn't answer this time? Those questions echoed louder than any prayer he could form. Ruth tried to comfort him, but even her voice trembled. She stood by the window, clutching her small cross necklace. "We have to believe," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed the same fear. Daniel wanted to believe. He wanted to let go, to truly give his struggles to God. But the more he tried, the more he realized how much he still held on to control. The tension between surrender and fear tightened, like a rope pulling from both ends. Then, just before sunrise, the machines beside their mother's bed began to beep erratically. Nurses rushed in, their voices firm and urgent. Daniel's body froze. He couldn't move. The world seemed to blur, lights flashing, footsteps rushing, voices overlapping. He felt Ruth's hand grip his arm, but he couldn't take his eyes off his mother. In that moment, time stopped. Everything Daniel believed about faith and trust hung in the balance. His heart pounded, and 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Every prayer he'd ever prayed, every doubt he'd ever buried. The storm he'd been trying to survive now raged at full force inside him. And just as a nurse called out for the doctor, Daniel dropped to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, whispering the only words left in him. "God, please, take this struggle. I can't carry it anymore." The sound of the machines suddenly steadied, and a nurse placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder. "She's stable again," she said softly, and for a moment, the air in the room felt lighter. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his knees still pressed to the cold floor. Ruth was crying quietly beside him, relief and exhaustion mixing together. But even as the crisis passed, a strange unease lingered in Daniel's chest. A feeling that something deeper was unfolding, something he couldn't yet see. Later that day, after the doctors assured them their mother was resting, Daniel stepped outside for air. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting streaks of gold over the wet pavement. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his manager. "We need to talk. It's urgent." He felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't shown up to work in days, and deadlines had already been slipping through his fingers. The weight of his job, his mother's health, and his fragile faith all pressed down at once. When he returned to the hospital room, His sister was gone. A note sat on the bedside table in her handwriting. Asterisk. I had to run home. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. Asterisk, but hours passed, and she didn't return. He tried calling her, but there was no answer, just voicemail. Anxiety crept back in, whispering old fears. What if something had happened? What if he was about to lose more than he could handle? As the evening shadows grew long across the room, his mother stirred for the first time. Her voice was weak, but clear. Daniel, she said, you can't keep holding on to everything. God's been trying to reach you. He leaned closer, struggling to understand. Reach me, he asked. She nodded faintly. You think faith means everything will be easy. But faith begins when you stop fighting the storm. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered. A calm but serious voice came through. Is this Daniel? Yes, he replied. This is Officer Bradley. We need to talk about your sister, Ruth. Daniel's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt as the words echoed in his ears. His heart raced. The peace he had been fighting to find vanished in an instant. Something had happened, and this time, his faith would be tested in a way he had never imagined. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the phone. The officer's voice on the other end was calm but heavy. There's been an accident, he said. Your sister's car was found off the main road, near the old bridge. Daniel's chest tightened. His legs felt weak as the world around him blurred into noise. He didn't even hang up properly. The phone slipped from his hand as he rushed out of the hospital room, his heart pounding harder with every step. The drive to the bridge felt endless. The same rain that had followed him for days began to fall again, soaking the roads, making everything darker, harder to see. Each drop felt like a reminder of the fear he'd tried so hard to surrender. When he finally reached the flashing lights of the police cars, he could barely breathe. He saw the twisted frame of Ruth's car on the side of the road, its headlights still faintly glowing. His heart broke at the sight, until he heard someone call his name. Daniel. He turned, and there she was, Ruth, standing by an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders, shaken but alive. Relief flooded through him so fast that his knees almost gave out. He ran to her, and they held each other, both crying, both shaking. She explained that her brakes had failed on the slippery road, but somehow, the car stopped just short of the river. It's like, something caught me, she whispered. I can't explain it, Daniel. I should have gone over the edge. In that moment, Daniel felt something shift deep inside him, something powerful, quiet, and real. He thought about all the nights he'd begged God for help, all the times he thought heaven was silent. Maybe it wasn't silence. Maybe it was grace, working in ways he couldn't see. Back at the hospital, his mother was awake, smiling weakly when she saw them together. You both made it, she whispered. God never left you. You just had to let go. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he held her hand. For the first time in years, he felt light, not because his problems were gone, but because he finally gave them to God. But just as peace began to settle over the room, his phone buzzed again. It was his manager, leaving a message that would change everything. Asterisk. Daniel, there's something you need to know. The company's shutting down, and your name came up in the report. Asterisk. Daniel froze. The storm wasn't over. But now, he wasn't facing it alone. Daniel sat quietly in the hospital hallway, listening to the hum of the lights above him. The message from his manager replayed in his head like an echo he couldn't escape. A few days ago, losing his job would have felt like the end of everything. But now, after everything that had happened, his mother's health scare, Ruth's accident, and the long nights of doubt, it felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned him. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to give his struggles to God. When Ruth joined him in the hallway, she looked pale but calm. What happened? She asked, sensing the tension in his face. He told her about the call, expecting her to worry, but instead she just nodded. Maybe this is God closing one door so another can open, she said softly. We've been holding on too tight to things that were never really in our control. Her words sank deep. She was right. All his life, Daniel had measured peace by stability, by paychecks, plans, and predictable outcomes. But faith, he realized, was about walking through the unknown and trusting that he wouldn't walk alone. A week later, his mother was released from the hospital. The three of them sat together at home, sharing dinner around the old wooden table. The house was small, quiet, and filled with the kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Daniel looked at his mother's smile, at his sister's laughter, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe he'd find a new job. Maybe he'd start something different, something led by purpose instead of fear. Whatever came, he knew one thing for sure. God had carried him through storms he thought would destroy him. The struggles hadn't disappeared, they had transformed him. That night, before going to bed, Daniel opened his mother's old Bible again. His eyes fell on Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. Asterisk, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Asterisk, he closed the book, smiled, and whispered, I finally understand. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds began to clear, and the first stars appeared, quiet reminders that even after the darkest storms, light always returns.